I've been a record collector for 30 years. And as such, I've seen the hobby change quite a bit in those last 30 years. My experience when I started is dramatically different than someone who's just starting into the hobby now. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to be joined by fellow vinyl community YouTuber Jason Arsenault, who's a relative newcomer to the vinyl world. And he and I are going to have a chat about the different experiences we've had up to this point. I think it'll be interesting. We're also recording this episode for an installment of the Vinyl Community Podcast, which can be found wherever you get your podcasts. So please stay tuned. Today on the Vinyl Community Podcast, it's a tale of two record collectors. We're going to be discussing the varied experiences of two collectors who have entered the hobby at two very different times. Welcome. I'm your host, Rob, from the Vinyl Community YouTube channel, Northern Revolutions, and I'm joined today by my friend and fellow Vinyl Community YouTube creator, Jason Arsenault. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks, Rob. Good to be here.
No problem. I'm very glad to have you. For those that may not know Jason, he's new to the YouTube world. He's been a long-time viewer and comment contributor to all of us that have been making videos on YouTube. And through a little bit of persuasion over several months, Jason has finally thrown his hat in the ring and started making some videos. And I'll leave a link to Jason's channel in the YouTube description and on the podcast page. He is a very talented presenter with a knowledge of music that I think surpasses mine. So,
not a chance.
Come on now. You're too modest. Anyway, I thought I came up with the idea a little while ago that you and I have very different vantage points of the record collecting hobby. And just by nature of when I started and when you started, our experiences are very different. So I thought we would talk about that today for those that haven't seen some of your videos and that. When did you decide that vinyl records was going to be a thing that was of interest to you, and how did that get started?
It was one of those things. I kind of represent the part of the VC or the part that everyone should hate, which is the guy that came on at COVID and then made the hobby blow up and the prices went up, right? So I'll wear that hat all day. But ultimately, I knew when I was like a kid that I was going to have records one day. I was going to have a record player. My family had a record player, very modest, nothing system, and they never even used it. Like I could vaguely remember a time when they used the 8-track or the record player, but I was always sitting at the cabinet flipping through what they had, and they had crap. Like, sorry, mom and dad, but like they didn't have great records or something that I really wanted to listen to. There was about 3 or 4 music records, and then there was a couple George Carlin records, and I would always just put those on what would have been a heavy rotation for me, right? But and then became a teenager, and then the thing was collecting dust, so I yarded this huge thing up to my room and put it in my room, and again, same old few records. And when it was finally time to leave the house, of course, all that stayed there, knowing full well someday, I'll have a record player. I've always been, music first kind of guy. And so it was bound to happen. And then finally, there was a couple of years where I almost, totally ignorant to the whole hobby and the tech side of things. I almost went and bought the Crosley type of things. And I'm glad I didn't, not that I'm going to crap all over that idea, not at all. But I wanted to enter the hobby kind of properly, if that's the right word. So I waited until the right time came. And then sure enough, COVID happened and I'm sitting around a lot more. Like, I think a buddy of mine got a record player and I'm like, why haven't I done this yet? This was supposed to happen forever ago. So bit the bullet, got on board and fell hardcore in love with it. Like I to this day, I can't stop consuming content from you guys. and now creating my own and just talking and listening. And I say to Sam all the time, Sam St. John, that, stop giving me homework. Like, I keep getting ideas for bands to listen to. And thanks to you and Chance's podcast, I've been on this Grace Potter kick lately. So yeah, I started late, but the passion was on very early.
Nice.
Yeah.
For point of contrast, my record journey, and I've talked about it on my channel in the past, vastly different than yours. I think we're about the same age, right? We're in our 40s, right?
43, yeah.
Okay, I'm 45, so we're very close in age. But my journey was much, much different. I grew up with a dad who was a passionate music fan, regular concert goer, big vinyl collection, great stereo system. And the first thing I think about when I think about my dad is him playing records. Like, that was ever present in our household. And it was early 90s, I would say 94-ish, when I would have been 15, something like that. That's when the music bug bit me. And like many folks, the Beatles were kind of my gateway. And that was at the time that the Beatles put out the anthologies, and it was on TV, and it was a big thing. And I didn't really know anything about them. And that just kind of opened the floodgates. And when I went off to university, not that I went off to university, I went to university in the same town that I live in, but when I got my own place, Dad allowed me to take his Beatles records, and I slowly started, building my collection from there, in the late 90s, when record collecting wasn't really a thing. I mean, that's the heyday of the CD boom, right? So for me, records has always been my preferred format. I have CDs, but I don't really listen to them anymore. But vinyl was always my thing, and I always bought vinyl. And, for the last 30 years, when an album came out, if it was available on vinyl, I bought it on vinyl. So very different experience than what you had. And I think that alone will probably illustrate some big differences in how we collect and how we built our collections.
It's interesting because you grew up with a bit of a guide per se, or
yes.
a structured kind of mentality to how to do this and what you need to do it correctly. And then I kind of dove in at the same time as thousands of other people. And depending on pretty much the content you absorbed, it kind of leaned you towards a certain way. Like another guy that collects records in town, one of my closest friends, he doesn't give a crap about pressings and mastering engineers, and all the power to him. It really is all about the music. Thank you, Mazzy. But I fell down that rabbit hole, and now I'm looking for the names of the mastering engineers. I'm enjoying looking at the dead wax, and
I'm the very different kind of avenue. I couldn't give a crap. It's about
and I think you're right, and I'm wrong, but I can't.
There's no right or wrong.
I think it's. I know, but it's so fun to nerd out, I guess, on that level. But
I mean, I nerd out on when we're talking about the Beatles. I have 17 Sgt. Peppers, and I have those 17 for a very specific reason on each of them. Aside from them, as long as it's in good shape, I'm a happy guy. What drew you to vinyl? What was it about the format that was the allure?
I think it's, there's nothing too original about my story. I think it's just that owning that physical copy, and you keep hearing, actually, you know what? I heard something on, I don't know if it was true or not, or just internet fodder, that I forget what actor it was. Someone had brought up a question, and it was relative to movies, but it relates well to records. It's like, I own all these movies through Apple, but when I die, what the hell happens to them? So there's that kind of mentality of it, the physically owning the piece. I think I've always been a bit of a collector in some ways. I don't really have a lot of, baseball cards and things like that, but the mentality has always been there to want to hold on to something, and more importantly, like to organize something, right? I'm pretty, kind of anal retentive in that state. Like, it's got to be a way. There's got to be the right way. There's got to be the wrong way. And I want to make sure it's done right. So it allows me to kind of put that out there, but without annoying anyone else, right? I can do my own thing. I can scratch that itch all I want. And records really gives me that opportunity. Now I did, I drank the Kool-Aid pretty early on that there is a specific sound to it, and I want to encourage that. And I have a very modest system. Like I it's not a very good system. It's not terrible, but I'm collecting for the system that I'll have one day, right? I'll save my pennies and I'll get something pretty special or whatever, special for my budget anyway. But so I'm collecting records because I want to get great sound. I'm collecting records because I want to hold on to pieces of artists that mean something to me, right? It really came down to, and that was my first, and I guess every vinyl collector, whenever you start, you have that thing. I'm only going to collect the ones that mean a lot to me. Like you would have said, I'm only going to collect that one Sgt. Pepper album that means a lot to me. And then it just kind of builds, right? So we all fall into that trap of starting out with good intentions, and then it kind of, the rationalizations that we all throw in there, they're hilarious, right? It's like, yeah, but this ends up being a good artist too. Or I didn't know about this artist, and now it means something to me. So now I'll collect everything by the band Free or whatever it is, right? So I got lots of justifications for all the purchases. It's like you go through my records and I was like, oh, I know why I got this. Oh, I know why I got this. And would I get rid of it? No, hell no. I'm not getting rid of any of these yet.
The thought of getting rid of a record, I can't fathom that idea.
I know. I even had a section on my phone for note. I have a whole bunch of sections on my phone in the notes section for everything record related. I have a section for records to consider to sell. And I initially put a couple titles on there, and I have never added to it. And I still haven't gotten rid of the ones that are on there. It's like, one of them is a copy of Rumors, but because I got the Kevin Gray Rumors, which is like sonically beautiful, right? But I don't want to get rid of the old one either, because it's an old one, and I really, and we'll probably get into the weeds about OGs versus reissues and stuff, but I don't want to get rid of either of them.
Yep, and I have both of those as well, and I don't need the original because I have the Kevin Gray, but
it's cool.
I kind of have them both. My perspective on it somewhat different. I'm not an audiophile. And if that's what somebody wants to be, knock yourself out. I couldn't care less. I can't tell the difference the majority of the time. My ears are crap. I've got tinnitus. I can't tell the difference a lot of the time. For me, the appeal to vinyl, a couple parts to it. I enjoy the tactile experience of taking this large 12 by 12 piece of physical media, pulling it out of its jacket, putting it on the turntable, brushing it off, putting the needle down. I just love that experience. And I love sitting there with a big jacket and reading whatever notes happen to be on there. And I an album is a work of art musically, but for me, my brain says that the actual, again, physical format of the LP is an extension of that work of art. It's big, it's beautiful artwork. The vinyl record itself, I think, looks beautiful. I just enjoy that whole physical experience of vinyl, having to get up halfway through the album and flip it over. And I think there's a sort of a nostalgia component, maybe not as nostalgic for someone who's new to the hobby, but it's kind of, especially when I'm talking about albums from the 70s or 60s or even 80s, vinyl was how those albums were released. And to me, a CD just, it feels like a copy of the original. And I don't mean the sound. It doesn't feel like the genuine artifact. The artist created that 40 years ago to be on a piece of 12-inch black wax. And to me, that was all of that together always drew me to vinyl.
And it's great that you started, like, we have these vastly different experiences how we started, but we both totally meld on that one idea. Yeah. And I'm a massive champion of the album experience, right? So back in the 60s and 70s, when they're recording these things, they are intentionally putting them together in a specific order. And that order also corresponds with what song is on what side of the album. That's the intention. That was their intention. My listeners, my fans are going to listen to it this way. Yep. And things have changed now. And now we're in a music industry where singles are kind of the thing, right? But I'm hoping we're kind of moving towards more back to the album experience again. I don't really know where the industry's going, but
Who knows?
I feel like back in the day, that's what it was, right? This is what you're supposed to do. You listen to all this, right? And I'm sure you can pick up the needle and drop it wherever you want, but I think most collectors and most vinyl enthusiasts probably appreciate the idea that you put it here, you let it ride out, and then you pick it up, you flip it, you put it here, and you let it ride out.
And
It's
that's a good
awesome.
point. It's far too easy in this digital age to be listening to an album. I don't like that song. Skip. I don't like that song. Skip. I mean,
Yeah.
granted, you can do that on vinyl, but it takes a little bit more finesse. There's
Yeah.
something about that's designed to be listened to start to finish. And I'm an album guy. I don't want to listen to a mix, like a playlist. I don't want to listen to a mix tape or a mix CD. I want to listen to an album from start to finish, and I always do. Even if there's stuff on there that I'm not a big fan of, I still want to listen to the entire thing. So I think vinyl forces you to do that. It forces you to maybe literally take time to appreciate the music,
Yeah.
which is a little less of a priority, I think, in the iTunes, Spotify era.
Yeah. And what are you going to get when you're streaming music when it comes to the liner notes ability? Like, I know
Nothing.
Apple can do a write up, right, and
Sure.
about an artist, and I'll read that, sure, but it's not the same as sitting down, listening, and then you're cracking open, like you said, this big 12-inch square that's, intentionally put together the way the artist and the producers wanted. Like, you want to learn about this album, this is what we're going to give you to learn about it. Beyond that, it's on, you don't need to know anything beyond this. Is their mentality, right?
Right. I mean, those
So I
streaming
like
platforms
that.
are great for, exploring something new. Like, and
Oh,
you
100%. Yeah.
mentioned off the top that you got turned on to Grace Potter from the podcast that Chance and I did. And a good way to, okay, well, that's an artist I've never heard. Let me go stream a couple songs on Spotify. Fine, cool, that's great. I sometimes I don't really do that, but I could see that as an avenue for it. But
Yeah, that's exactly how I use it. And to that point, I think a couple of weeks ago, I was trying to get better organized with all this homework that you guys keep giving me and just throwing the albums into a playlist, because I still have, and I reconnected with a buddy of mine who lives back east, and because he saw my post and he's like, "Hey, nice job," and I was like, "Hey, thanks a lot," and he's like, "I'm still listening to the same crap I used to." I'm like, "Me too. My phone still has like 1,000+ songs that I got from Napster or LimeWire or whatever, right?"
yep,
So I need to be organized and be more intentional. This is all about being intentional with music, right? And back to streaming. Streaming is my avenue to purchase new records. If that makes sense.
that's a good way to. It's a good way to put it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I will not buy blind buys, and I just did that blind buy video.
Yep.
Blind buys for me are usually dollar store blind buys, or if the VC tells me, like, look, if you like this, you will like this, and hey, look, Kevin Gray did this, or it's pressed here, like, you're going to get a quality piece. So blind buys are few and far between when it comes to high dollar purchases. So I really need to use streaming in order to justify that purchase.
Yeah.
And I've had some losses, but mostly wins. Like, and thanks to streaming, that keeps that ratio high.
That's good. You mentioned a moment ago purchasing. It's your avenue for purchasing records. I think our purchasing experiences will probably be different as well.
Very different. You lucky bugger.
So there's two components to this, and please address either one or both if you want. Number one, I started buying almost 30 years before you did. So there's some differences there. I am also very, very close to the largest city in the country. Jason and I are both Canadian, for those that are listening. I live very near Toronto, and Jason lives pretty close to Santa Claus, or Sasquatch. I mean, he's pretty remote. So
Yeah.
when it comes to buying, what has been your buying experience? You said, you got in the pandemic, so you've been at this, 3 or 4 years. Because of your remoteness, because of when you started purchasing records, how do you buy records, and what's that experience like?
I've had some pretty fortunate experiences considering, my, like, where I'm at physically, but I've over the course of 2 or 3 years, I've acquired and gotten rid of, sadly, like, big collections. I think I found about 1,500 records once from a guy. in a town about 40 minutes away. Most, like, we're talking 90% of that were just no good. And then I got access to a really beautiful collection that I'm still kind of peeking through. But those are the exception to the rule, right? Basically, yeah, I have to pay that crazy shipping, like Canada's shipping and all those duties and exchange rates and all that kind of stuff through the States. It hurts. It is the most ridiculous hobby. Rob, why am I doing this? Like,
Yep.
like, what was that line that everyone uses? What do you like best, the inconvenience or the cost?
Right.
Like, but back to your point, yeah, it's basically been an online battle for me, right? And, fingers crossed every time that the mailer's in good condition and all that kind of stuff. Now, hats off to, like, I live in northern BC, about halfway up the province of British Columbia. So, yeah, about halfway to the Yukon or a little more. And so to get to Vancouver is, a hour and a half flight, or it's a 16-hour drive. So, yeah, I'm pretty out there. But, hats off to a couple people in town that are trying to stock records. They stock some used stuff mainly, and it's so fun to dig. I don't care where I'm, like, if I see records, I'm going to dig. And even if I know they're garbage, I'll still dig, because I don't get that experience of being able to go to the shop, like proper record stores, right? And anytime I travel to Vancouver or any other center, that's my goal. I'm going to a record store to have that experience, because, yeah, it's all shipping for me for the most part. And it hurts. It's a painful button to click when it says $20 to ship an album, right? And we talked to our comrades in the States there, colleagues in the States, our fellow VC people. And I think I asked them once, like, how much does it cost to ship a record? And they're like, $5 to $10 or something at most. It's ridiculous. Like, I'd be doing the VCLT all over the place. Like, I think that's a beautiful thing about the VC, and maybe we'll get into that. But that aspect of things is, like, I would love to live in that world where shipping was cheap.
Yeah. I mean, so the flip side of that, though, is that you can buy online, and you have Discogs and you have eBay and you have all the other online music retailers you can buy from.
Yeah.
When I started collecting in 94, 95, the internet didn't exist.
Yeah.
Right.
You had no way to research anything.
I couldn't research anything. There was no eBay. There was no Discogs. There was no Amazon. So how did I buy records? Well, as I mentioned, I'm close to Toronto, and there were record stores. But at that point in time, just about every record store, music store, had transitioned over to CD by that time. In the early 90s, you'd be hard pressed to find records in a record store. There were a couple used record stores in the town that I live in, and there were a few in Toronto, so I could go to record stores. Now, the plus side of the fact that there weren't a lot of record stores and not a lot of people were buying vinyl, it wasn't expensive and it was easy to get. And I'll use the example set off the top. I'm a big Beatles fan. I have all original Canadian first pressings of every Beatles album.
Whoa.
And by and large, they are flawless.
Wow.
They don't look like they're 50 years old. They look like they're 10 years old. No problem finding any of them. And I look at some of them, there's some of them, I don't look at them all the time. I've got 200 Beatles records, and they're not the ones that I play typically. But I'll pull out one of them, and I'm like, I just got to check the matrix number on this, because no way this is an original because it's in this good a shape. And lo and behold, it is, because I bought them in 1994 when they were only 30 years old, and no one was buying records on the scale that they are today. Everyone was moving to CDs, so people were getting rid of their records. So, yeah, I didn't have eBay and Discogs and all that kind of stuff, but I had access to those records because people were selling them and they weren't worth anything. So I'm thankful from that perspective that I had those. Now, I do a lot of buying on eBay and Discogs now because, there's lots of stuff, hard to find stuff that I'm, trying to track down, or stuff from overseas or whatever. And I still use that. And to your point, yeah, shipping kills you, but it's still nice to have that because we have access now to things that I didn't when I started. I'll go back to my Beatles analogy one more time. I'm trying to round out all of my original first pressings UK Beatles albums. You don't find them here. So I got to get them either on Discogs or on eBay from England, typically. A little more
Yeah,
expensive than they were back in the day, but at least I have access to them when I didn't 30 years ago, unless I
that's
physically
right.
went to England to get it. So it's a very different buying experience when I started to, what the buying experience is now. And I don't know if it's easier to build a collection now or harder. There's more available and there's more options to
But
buy it, but it's a hell of a lot more expensive.
there's more people like me that jump in the hobby that, there's less records to go around. Tell me if I'm wrong here. Don't you find that it's pretty relatively easy to find Canadian OG pressings?
Yep.
Like, I wouldn't say it's easy, but
Yep.
like it's almost like the secret's, the secret's not quite out yet, that there's quite a few OG Canadian pressings of albums from
Yep.
around the world.
Yep.
And it's not that hard to find. Like, I've come across so many, there's so many in my collection. I'm like, really? This is a first pressing? That, like, back to our original points about the greatness of vinyl, like to hold an original. And that, that seems to be kind of something that's kind of come up in the zeitgeist of the VC over the last year is people saying no to reissues and going back to OG collecting. And there is something special about holding that original one. Like, it's like, this is 50 years old. I think my oldest record's probably like, maybe there's a 60-year-old record here. And like, yeah, oh, you know what it was? One of my OG records that was still sealed was, and it's not that old, I guess it's in the 70s, that Canadian band Lighthouse.
Yes.
And it's Lighthouse Live, and it was still in the shrink. And of course, the shrink is so old, it's just crumbling off it. But I pulled it out, and I was just so thrilled. I'm like, this is the first time this piece of wax has seen the light of day since the factory put it in there. Like,
Yep.
like I didn't feel bad opening it. I know there's some people that don't want to do that. That's totally cool. Do your thing. But I was like thrilled pulling that out. I'm like, wow, cool. Like, no one has seen this. No one has touched this. Hasn't breathed air since, 1970, whatever.
Yep.
I really, really enjoy that. But just back to your collecting in the city thing, did you ever pick up an actual LP from Sam on Yonge Street?
Absolutely.
Sam
the Record Man. For those that are listening that are not Canadian, Sam the Record Man was a massive record store at Yonge and Dundas in Toronto, probably the biggest record store. And it was a landmark. It was huge. It had a giant, and I'll throw a picture up for those on YouTube, a giant sign that was these giant neon records that in neon lights, and they looked like they were spinning, and they were like 2 stories tall. And that was the record store.
It was awesome. Like, when I visited Toronto, it was like I went, like, sister showed me, oh, there's Yonge Street. Oh, there's Sam the Record Man. Like, oh my God, that's it. Because it was a chain across Canada. Right. And I remember when they started closing up. And by the time I got to Toronto, I think most of them had closed, but the Yonge Street, the flagship store, was still kind of running. And what an icon, right?
It's and it had been around for years. I have records of my dad's that he purchased. For example, he purchased his copy of Beatles' White Album the day that it came out, from Sam the Record Man on Yonge Street in 60.
Oh my gosh,
8 or 9 or whenever it was that came out.
That's a wicked story.
And I have it. And I have records that I bought at that same record store 30 years later. I mean, like, I've got an original first pressing of U2's Octung Baby. I bought it at Sam the Record Man in Toronto. So
Rob, do you think that our kids in 30 years are going to be on a stream like this saying, I remember the day that came out and I downloaded it from Apple?
Probably not. No.
From Apple? Probably not.
Probably not. No. I mean, I hope that our kids share the passion for music, but I don't know. I don't know what's going to become of this collection. I got many more years, hopefully, knock on IKEA wood, before I have to worry about that. So, yeah. But speaking of, our collections and what we do with them, so you've only been doing this 3-4 years now. What's your collection look like? Is it not that size matters, but what give us an indication, like what, how deep have you dove in?
Well, that brings up a point that I wanted to relay. And I guess I'm going to sound like, I hate using the word broken record. It feels like an analogy we're just not allowed to use anymore. But I feel like if there's a listener out there that's new to collecting, and if you haven't heard this before, I'll say it again. It's like, be selective right from the start.
Yes.
Don't just, if you see a Gordon Lightfoot album and you want that album really bad and it's like in a dollar bin and it's trashed, don't do it. There'll be others.
Right.
If you're going to collect records, don't bring crap home, because
Right.
you're going to run out of room. It's
Yep.
just inevitable. And I learned that lesson probably earlier than most, just because of thanks to the VC basically. So I started strong. Like within my first year collecting, I had this 1,500 album collection in my basement.
Whoa.
And I,
Whoa.
well,
in a year, you
yes.
had 1,500 records.
So I was collecting records, and so end of the story is basically right now I have about 300 albums.
Okay.
So, but when I first started, I was, collecting, I probably had about 30 to 50 albums. And then I got wind through this guy that I know that there's this older gentleman about 40 minutes away who's trying to offload a bunch of records. I'm like, sweet, I'm brand new to this hobby. I can't get enough. So I bring home 2 truckloads basically of records over the course of a month and pay $300 for 1,500 albums. 90% of them are not around here anymore. I'll just say that.
Right.
I got rid of them, and maybe even more than 90%. So I basically paid $300 for, 25 albums that I still have.
Right.
And however, the experience of going through all those was totally worth it. Like 100%. I'll do it again for sure. So I've had access to a lot of records, and that, to your point about how do I accumulate? Well, I got rid of the crap. I got rid of stuff, and I'm trying to be as selective as I possibly can. I'm trying to stick to the original plan of I only want to own things that mean something to me. Turns out, as I learn more about music, they start to mean something to me, or I appreciate the history of a label or of an artist, and I want to have that. So I'm about 300 records in, and I'm trying my hardest, and usually, and I guess my geographical location really helps to keep those numbers low, because
Sure.
I'd have to pay top dollar for everything that come into the house. Right. So I got a lot of pride in my collection. Like I really do think what I have is admirable or respectable to people that like my genres of music. And not that that's what this is about, but I'm pretty proud of the records I have, and I don't have a lot of filler, right? Like what do they say? All killer, no filler.
Right.
Not quite to that level, but I got about 300 albums, and my collection, like my listening tastes for the most part are rock, right? I just like classic rock. I like a bit of grunge because Pearl Jam's my number one favorite band. It always will be. But I'm really a fan of classic rock stuff, and old blues stuff. Like, give me the Robert Johnson, the Son House, the Little Walter, all that kind of old blues stuff. I want all that stuff. And someday I'll have originals of the things that matter to me. But folk, blues, psych, rock, that's kind of where I go. I don't have much of a flavor for country. Nothing wrong with that. Like Colter Wall, Canadian singer-songwriter, country, like more of an outlaw country guy. He is high on my list of someone that I'm going to end up collecting all of. But that's about as close to country as I get.
Sure.
Hip hop, don't know anything about it, and I feel terrible about that because I know it's a massive genre. I know there's a lot of talent.
And but you don't have to like everything, right?
No, I don't. But I kind of want to be introduced to this. Like if I want to be someone that's, well versed in a lot of genres, but my God, it takes time to listen.
A lot of work.
So I got about 300 albums, and most of them are blues, rock, psych, folk. And
is it mostly older, like original pressings or later reissues, or do you have a lot of new vinyl? What's the makeup there?
I would say I have about, I don't know, I'd be kind of taking a big guess here, saying 50-50 kind of newer stuff versus old, either originals or reissues, right? Like stuff pre 1990, I'd say is the majority of my collection for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I'm kind of starting to go down that road of really appreciating more owning OGs. But when I know that a newer record is pressed properly and it's had the good hands on it of your Kevin Grays, your Bernie Grunmans and all that, I will look to collect those. But I'm trying to just only bring in stuff that I know I will always want to listen to. And I say that full well knowing that, like, I've already run out of room in my cabinets in the other room there. I've already run out of room. There are already records on the floor, stacked nicely, mind you.
Of course.
But I'm trying to figure out my solution to record storage now. And I say I'm going to be a really nitpicky collector, but I'd be surprised if in my lifetime I don't hover around the 1,000 mark, and that's 700 albums away. but I got time, and I'm learning patience with this hobby. Again, thanks to my geographical location and the fact that I'm not a millionaire, I can kind of
Sure.
I can slow my roll a bit. But
Sure. This is one of those instances where our experiences are nearly identical, actually. I have that sort of same philosophy that, to use your line, all killer, no filler. Everything that I have, I listen to.
nice.
I've been doing it 30 years, whatever.
How big is yours, Rob?
I only have 700 records. And I say only, like 700 is a pretty absurd amount of records when you think about it.
Yes, it is.
But when you see other people like Mazzy in his giant room, or,
7,000, yeah.
there's guys that just have massive walls of records behind them. I got about 700 albums in 30 years. So you can tell I'm quite selective about what I buy.
I love it.
I started, with older stuff. I mentioned I'm a classic rock guy. Beatles, the band, Creedence, Fleetwood Mac. That was what got me into music as a teenager in the 90s, when all my friends were listening to Pearl Jam, Nirvana, which doesn't interest me, didn't then, still doesn't now. I was a classic rock guy. So that's where I started. And for a very long time, it was just, it was older vinyl. And then, as I mentioned earlier on, as albums came out through the 90s and the early 2000s, if by chance they came out on vinyl, I'd find a way to get it on vinyl. U2 was one of those bands that never stopped releasing vinyl. So I have all those albums from the 90s and the early 2000s on vinyl that they've since reissued in the last, 8 or 9 years. But for the longest time, they were only the OGs, and they're very expensive. So, Octung Baby and Zooropa, All That You Can't Leave Behind. And those albums were impossible to find, and I bought them when they first came out. And there was
do you have an OG of Acton Baby?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. God, that's a wicked album. I need that.
Yeah, bought it at Sam the Record Man. So,
so great.
Yep. So I had some new vinyl, but then when the vinyl resurgence started around, I don't know, 2009, 2010, something, that was when vinyl started to make a comeback and more stuff was getting released. I was like, this is great. I'll buy some reissues. I'll buy those albums that were never previously available on vinyl, and I love that, and I still buy those. There's albums being released every single day that didn't see original vinyl release years ago, so I love that, because I've got some of those albums on CD, but I don't really want to go and. It's not that I'm anti-CD. I just don't enjoy the experience, and my brain just doesn't go, "Hey, go over to the CDs and grab that album." I'd rather just
yeah.
So I'm glad to see a lot of those. So I shifted and I went sort of all new vinyl for a very long time. And within the last what's that?
No, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Within the last couple of years, I've really dialed back on the new vinyl. It's expensive. It's way more expensive than it used to be. And especially in Canada, we've been hit in the last couple of years with some really, really hefty price increases from the major labels. Our record prices have gone up 40, 50% in some cases on new vinyl. And I'm going $60, $50 for a new vinyl record. And if I got to pay shipping, I'm paying like $80 for, I'm like, I'm out. So now I'm in a phase where I'm going back and plugging holes in my collection with older records. I don't care if they're first pressings. They could be, an album from the 60s that was reissued in the 70s. Cool. I don't care. I just want to own that record if it's in good shape. Let me, there's a ton of stuff. I mean, our collections are never complete. I love classic rock, and there's a ton of classic rock that I don't have on vinyl. So I'll go to flea markets. I'll go to record shows, and I'll look for, things that I'm missing. And I'd rather pay $10 or $15 for a 70s reissue of something than pay $60 for something that's brand new, unless it's something that I really, really, really have to have. But circling back to the answer to my own question, I'm like you. It's very selective because it's expensive.
It is. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned CDs there, and I got, I don't know, 100 CDs or whatever it is, because that was the format to collect when I was, in university and
Yep.
collecting and all that stuff. And I'm still, I don't really listen to them hardly ever. Actually, I never listen to them.
Me
But
neither.
my son will actually put a CD on, which I totally endorse. Right, he'll put his CDs on, and it's pretty super cool that they still do that. But I think it's funny in the VC how, depending on, I guess, the personality, but people will always sort of put that caveat: "I'm not against this. I'm not against this." And it's like, yeah, I'm not crapping on CDs or streaming. They definitely have. They've served their purpose, right? They got me listening to music a lot more, and they make me an attentive and a smart listener.
Of
But
course.
yeah, I don't touch them anymore either.
Funny anecdote. I must have done something right as a father. I have a 7-year-old son, and he is used to me playing records, and he sees me playing records all the time. And he sees me doing the YouTube thing, and he goes, "Oh, not another one of your silly videos." But he knows what a record is, and he understands how it works and whatever. And one
Yeah.
day I took out a CD, and he goes, "Dad, what's that?" I'm like, "It's a CD." And he goes, "What's a CD?" I'm like, "What has music on?" He goes, "That's not a record." And I'm like, "Yeah, I did it.
Yeah, that's right.
I raised this
We'll
boy
just
right.
stop the conversation there. You don't need to know anymore,
I,
son.
I raised this boy right." It was pretty funny. So
Definitely a good part of the hobby too is kind of, if you're a parent, to get your kids to appreciate the idea of listening to music. Like, I don't care what format they'll end up using in life, or I don't care what artists they listen to, but if they can learn something from me, it's just that if you're going to put someone's art on, you're going to pay attention to the art, right? It doesn't matter what style of music it is. Like, yeah, Taylor Swift, great example. My daughter's a Swiftie, massive fan, right? I got nothing against Taylor. I don't know enough about her, and there's albums that I would like to explore based on your passion for her, and my daughter's as well.
yeah,
And like, good, like, that's great. You found an artist you're passionate about. Just remember that person is super popular for a reason, right? I don't care, what you could say about various artists that have climbed the ladder really quickly. They all have some kind of talent. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to maintain that
right.
level, or to be there to put out an album. So pay attention to what they're doing. I don't care how you do it, but they want you to hear what they're saying. So
Yep.
please, if you're going to put time in, pay attention and really put the time in.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. As we're drawing to the end here, what's your focus these days? What's the kind of stuff you're on the hunt for? What's your taste du jour?
Yeah, I my Discogs want list is pretty
Me
pretty
too.
specific. Like, yeah, because I'm a nerd for pressings and all that. When I finally figure out, okay, I do want this album, I will make sure that I have the exact pressings I want. And so if I ever get a chance to go to a store, I will, like, on the way to the store, I'll be scrolling through, looking at the covers, getting them in my mind, and I'll be ready to pick when I'm there. But my want lists are, again, kind of my genre. So usually kind of 60s, 70s rock and psych. And I'm always on the hunt for any kind of acoustic blues stuff. I really liked how Analog Productions did some really fantastic reissues, and I got a few of them. Anytime a description of an album it feels like the artist is in the room, I'm all in. Like, I want that album. So Muddy Waters, the folk singer that AP did, and then there's a Lightning Hopkins that AP did on the Prestige, on their reissue series for that. Like, that kind of stuff I could sit and listen to all day. Anything acoustic related, I just want to sit and listen so bad, right? But ultimately, yeah, I am still in the hunt for the genres that I've always liked. I've dipped my toe into the whole jazz world, and I have a massive respect for those artists. But I have, like, 5 or 6 jazz albums, whereas other people are exclusively jazz. And I get that. That's super cool, awesome passion. But mainly, yeah, my tastes haven't veered off too far. Now, that being said, I really do enjoy learning from the VC about different styles of music, and I haven't gotten into anything electronica or any kind of what they call library music and all that kind of stuff. Like, I do one day want to learn about all this stuff, but like you said before, it's like, there's only so much time, and you don't have to know everything. But yeah, I like. I want to find some rare stuff. I think it's super cool to pick up an album that's different, not necessarily blind buy, but not because I want to try to be different, but just because I don't know. I've heard a lot of classic rock, and I think I want to sort of veer off into different directions. Like, I think mainly right now, it's in the last few months, I've been kind of on this kick to learn more about sort of funky music. And I picked up the Meters album that Kevin Gray did through Jackpot Records. I spun that last night again. That is a fantastic listen. I guess, sorry, long answer to a short question. I'm loving exploring everything, and I won't really turn down any kind of music.
Well, you make a good point, and you brought up suggestions from the VC and learning about new things, and I think you mentioned it earlier on. There's a thing in the vinyl community called VCLT, which for the uninitiated is an acronym for Vinyl Community Love Train. Don't know who came up with it, but often those of us that make videos and that on YouTube will send records to each other, things we think they might like. And that's a wonderful, I've given some and I've received some, and it's a great way to get exposed to, things that you hadn't heard previously. I did a video a few weeks ago. I got some VCLT from Matt at Prime Analog Records.
I just watched that. Yeah.
And he sent me some stuff
Gino Vanelli.
way out of I knew Gino Vanelli was coming, way out of my comfort zone. And I liked some of it a lot. I liked some of it fine. And, one of them I was like, whatever. But I loved the exploration part of it. So the vinyl community is a great resource for learning about other things and going way outside your comfort zone, or even finding other acts within the genres that you like, that you may not have heard of. It's a great resource.
It is really good. And I really admire, and I watch a ton of channels, like, I sub to maybe over 100 channels, right? And I try to absorb as much as I can. And you can see and this isn't meant in the pejorative sense, but like there's little factions, like little groups of people, and you can see
it is a little clicky.
Yeah. And and there's more pros and cons to that, I think. And I love observing the guys that know each other's tastes really well. Oh, you'll like this. And like, I know, like Sam did a video and he said, oh yeah. And I forget who he referenced, but oh yeah, MGK Boston or whatever, you'll like this one. Or, Rob will like this one. You should try this. And like getting to know other guys on that level I think that's just a wonderful benefit of the VC in general. That's kind of one of the reasons I wanted to get involved, right? That sense of community and learning about other tastes. And yeah, it's just, it's been very rewarding in that sense. And the VCLT aspect, like that's the icing on the cake. That is the coolest thing ever. Sure, it's cheaper in the States to do that. And if I lived down there, I'd be throwing records all over the place. Shout out to Chance, concert buddy there, because he sent me something. It was actually before I started the channel. And the thrill I got from receiving a record in the mail, like I thought that was just the kindest thing ever. You're sharing art. In this case, it was kind of more of a comedy type of thing, but right. It was pretty meaningful. I thought it was awesome, and hats off to everyone that continues to do that.
That's great. You mentioned Mike at MGK Boston. He's going to be here at Northern Revolution's World Headquarters in 3 weeks.
Oh, that's awesome. He's awesome. I love his videos.
He's coming.
I love his Friday cheers.
He's coming to town. Him and his wife Patty. They're going to be here, and I have some VCLT for him. So rather than send it to him, I'm just going to give it to him while he's here, and we'll probably shoot a video. So
save you the $30 to mail it across the border.
that wasn't my initial motive, but when I thought about it, I'm like, yeah, that's probably a smart way to do it. So
yeah.
That will do it for today's episode. Thank you, Jason, for joining me today. That was a fun discussion, and it's we both are passionate about this hobby, and we both had very different journeys to ultimately end up at the same place. So,
well said. I really appreciate the opportunity, Rob. You've been such a champion for introducing new channels, and of course pushing out the Canadian content. So, keep up the great work on your end. It really motivates me.
Well, you do a great job, man. I'm really glad that you decided to jump in, and you're a very welcome permanent addition to the team on our Wednesday night live stream that we do from Glenn's basement. So
awesome.
Glad to have you aboard, man. For those that want to, please check out Jason Arsenault on YouTube, a new channel in the vinyl community with a great knowledge of music and a far better presenter than I am. So thank you, Jason. And thanks everybody for watching. This has been another installment of the Vinyl Community Podcasts.